There's a famous saying, I've even seen it on a t-shirt, that it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. But you know, sometimes it can be awfully late in the game. For instance, when King Louis the Doomed, on May 5th of 1789, summoned the Estates General, the French equivalent of a parliament, sort of, for the first time in 175 years, and the last time it ever met. Now, Louis was a hapless man sitting atop a volcano, and that never ends well. To give him what credit I can, he didn't create the volcano, and he didn't get a lot of good advice. But, if I'd been there, of course, I'd have been a 18th century French noble, and I've probably given him completely fatuous counsel. But somebody needed to be there to tell him to summon it earlier. Maybe 50 years before he was born. Yeah, you see the problem. Because France didn't just lack a parliament, it lacked a parliamentary tradition. When Louis finally did summon the Estates General, it immediately deadlocked in a bitter squabble over how to vote. Because it was very unlike the English Parliament. One trivial difference. There were 3, not 2 estates. There were the nobles, there were the clergy, and there were the commoners. And what that meant is that if they voted by estate, which is what the nobles and the clergy wanted to do, the commoners always would have been outvoted. Whereas in England, very early on, the commons split off as one of 2 chambers and rapidly managed to assert primacy on money bills because they represented the people who were going to pay for it all. So you see, actually, it's not a trivial difference at all. It's also not a trivial difference that the English Parliament kept meeting, and that in power struggles between kings and nobles, between groups of nobles, between rival claimants to the throne, it was always vitally important to have the support of the common people and to secure it formally through acts of parliament. In France, things were totally different. And Jean-Louis Delhomme, a Swiss expatriate, a very keen observer of the English situation, said that it was critically important that when the nobility was strong in England in the Middle Ages, they were not so strong that they could dominate the king without the support of the commoners. So they had to have connections with the nation at large, and it had to be a mutually satisfying relationship. French nobility dominated the king totally, without any need for a connection with the peasants, who they despised and scorned, and eventually, as the kings became stronger, the nobles had no allies to check the rise of absolute monarchy. The parliament was no use at all. Distinguished French jurist Jean Bodin, writing in the 16th century, said that when Parlement or Estates General ratified edicts from the king, it wasn't because they weren't law otherwise, it was just to help secure obedience. The head of France's highest court in 1527 expressly assured the king that they would never presume to pass judgment on his decrees because you, sire, are above the law. And at the time, I'm sure the king felt pleased as punch about that. I'm an absolute monarch, I can do anything I want. We'll soon have those English in the dirt. But the fact is, what looked like a great source of strength was a great source of weakness. There was no real political community in France. And at the time of the revolution, as things start to get out of hand, the king tries to enlist the French nation in, of all things, governing the French nation. There are no mechanisms and there's no habit. Instead, the Estates General meets, it deadlocks, and the third estate, the common people, go off, declare themselves the political nation, and they proceed to govern without any checks on their authority, just as the kings had done before, and previously to that, the nobles. You need a functioning tradition of political civility if you are to deal intelligently with emergencies and effectively, and make sure that everybody's interests are represented and the rule of law is preserved. And the Estates General was completely feeble. It hadn't met for 175 years. Last meeting had been in 1614, but before that it didn't meet regularly. It would go 60 years at a time without being convened. There simply was no political nation in France. L'État c'est moi, the king said. And unfortunately, that was largely true. And when the monarchy crumbled, so did the state, and mob rule intervened. So let's remember that our own heritage of functioning institutions that check and balance one another is a precious and a rare thing in history. And so let's not wait until it's too late to revitalize it. They tried that in France, and it was a very bad time to do the wrong thing.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.